Bingo. Excellent. All right. Well, thanks very much for the invite to present remotely from Albany on this brief talk. I really wanted to focus on dieback from a couple of points of view, from threatened species and communities angle, but my take-home message really is that dieback, as Brett has already indicated, is one of several threats that interact, and for managers, that's a significant point that needs attention. Next.
Turn the volume on.
So can I control this if I press the arrow or something?
Sorry, David.
Brady,
There
can
we go. Yep. Okay, so some DBCA maps, a few years old, but they convey on the left-hand side the broad thrust of where threatened species are, shown in the red dots, with conservation estate in green, and then where dieback was recorded a few years ago. So you can see it's a near coastal phenomenon, and particularly relevant to the south coast. Next slide. Kwongkan, sorry, jump one. Kwongkan is a Noongar word, also appears in the Naju language. And von Brandenstein, the linguist, in 1988, explained that it means where the light hits the sand or where the spirits are in the sand. And the map shows with filled in red dots from various vocabularies recorded mainly by Daisy Bates where the word was used. So you can see that it's fairly widespread across the southwest Australian floristic region and into the adjacent Great Western Woodlands. And therefore was a vegetation formation that was recognised by Aboriginal people quite extensively. Next. So these photos, some of you may have seen before. They just illustrate the very clear interaction between dieback and fire in the montane kwongkan heathlands of the eastern Stirling Range. A photo taken in 1980 showing a beautiful thicket alive with honeyeaters and honey possums of Banksia brownii and Banksia montana, and then in 2013 the same view in which the Banksias have just gone. And that is due in part to dieback. Brownii and montana are both highly susceptible, but also the fire regime in the Stirling Range is really going to be the nail in the coffin on this one, and especially with the two fires within 18 months of each other we've just experienced. Banksia montana exists in the wild now only as seedlings. Banksia brownii is extinct from these upper montane kwongkan heathlands. And a host of interactions are reflected, including the pollination involving honey possums and honeyeaters. Next. So I wanted to talk about granite outcrops specifically, and go back to a rather old publication that was the first book presentation of threatened plants in southwestern Australia. And in the introductory review, we examined where in the landscape are threatened species concentrated. And the outcome is shown in this slide, where 2/3, in fact, were in uplands. So by that, I mean granite uplands, quartzitic mountains such as the Stirling Range and the Barrens, and high sandplain. About a quarter of the threatened species occurred on transitional slopes, and only 11% were in lowland positions. This data has been updated and very accurately quantified by Carl Gosper and co-authors in a paper in the Biological Journal of the Linnean Society, now in press, and the same story prevails. So if you want to work on threatened species, then uplands are really important. And if you care about the conservation of those susceptible to dieback, then your focus arguably should be primarily on the uplands. Next slide. And this is just one example of dieback. This is at Chain Beach, and the photo from 1979 in the bottom, with the arrowed wildflower picker, who presumably was contributing towards the spread of dieback. The front photographed at the same time as shown in the top illustration. And the granite uplands of this landscape are on the horizon. So the granite is very much impacted by dieback in these landscapes. Next one. And phosphite spraying has been something that UWA has worked with DBCA on. This is Betty's Beach, just on the coastal side of Mount Many Peaks. And it's a place where threatened species are concentrated and where phosphite has been applied. Next photo. So in terms of threatened and common species that are susceptible to dieback, it's rich in proteaceae and it has some real gems like Dasypogon remote. Now, dinosaur plant lineage, if you like. Andersonia pinasta is an endangered species. So it's quite rich. Next photo. The beauty of this work is that there are adjacent patches of kwongkan just below granites. This is a photo of a phosphite sprayed healthy kwongkan, which is looking pretty spiffing. Crash up. Next slide. But right beside it is phosphite sprayed but dieback infested kwongkan. And you know the effects are self-evident. Management of this reserve really does require more than the phosphite spraying. There's a tract in the upper top left that is a typical coastal tract, braided until recently repaired and restored. So you know, controlling human access is fundamental, and exercising good hygiene, as we've already heard, really important. Next. I just wanted to draw attention to Banksia verticillata. We have a paper now that Colin Yates is senior author on. This is perhaps one of the most intensively studied granite endemic dieback susceptible plants on the south coast. There's dead verticillata in the foreground, and just to the right of it is a live plant in Torndirrup National Park. It's been the subject of intensive work by universities and by DBCA over many years now, and the issue with verticillata is while dieback has undoubtedly contributed to its decline, canker diseases are emerging as the major threat killing adult plants. How you manage canker disease in conjunction with managing dieback is really new territory for us, I guess. Extremely difficult. Cankers are aerially borne infective agents, so controlling their spread, and interestingly, the canker organisms responsible are native to the south coast. We have zero understanding really of their biology, what causes outbreaks, why a species like Banksia verticillata in particular is on the downward trend, and management is significantly challenging. Even with the best dieback hygiene exercised, you're still going to lose plants of this. On top of that, fire also causes the death of these plants, and they take 10 to 20, probably 20 years to start flowering again after fire. Seedling recruitment does occur. We've documented that with UWA student camps. But the fate of the seedlings is something that will take 30 years to unfold. So we can't underestimate these sort of challenges. and have to apply the raft of techniques, including ex situ seed collection and establishing remote populations away from the causes of the death of some of these plants. So I guess I wanted to conclude on the final slide, I think, next one, just with a very brief reference to Alison Lolfitz's PhD. She and I are now working intensively with Noongar elders, trying to understand their cultural approaches to caring for country. We established in a paper that is now in press in the Biological Journal of the Linnean Society again, in which we took elders to a place south of Jerramunga, Penyup, and just took them to two sites. One was a granite upland and the other was a creek line, and asked them various open-ended questions about what they could recall in their childhood and their family existence in the bush that they did on these two landscape positions. We then extended those questions across the Albany district and also in the Esperance area with a range of elders. And the data established quantitatively that basically most daily life occurred in what we call yodfuls, or young, often disturbed fertile landscapes, such as around wetland margins and coastal dunes. That's where the majority of camping occurred, where the vast majority of food plants and hunting were secured. They were burnt regularly under cool, very small scale burns, and lots of sitting around campfires and yarning. The granite uplands, even if just as in this photo, a subtle difference in elevation, on the other hand, were almost universally regarded as special places and restricted areas. There are places where only men could go, where only women could go, where kids couldn't go. And there are places only for day visits, not for camping. If you were there up at night, you were in big trouble. There was some food plants and some animals. Lizard traps, for example, occur on these. Rock pools were created and initiation rites practiced. So the bottom line was that Noongars had worked out a long time ago that these subtle uplands we have in our landscapes are to be revered and protected at all costs. And the places where humans are best situated, happily this applies with Western contemporary peoples as much as traditional Noongars, is on the lowlands, is along the beaches, around the wetlands. This is a little bit heretical in terms of conservation. We hear how fragile wetlands are and beaches are and how we really need to care for them. In terms of a scale of fragility, the uplands are orders of magnitude more fragile. And so I just wanted to leave you with that concluding thought that in managing dieback, consider the interactions with things like fire and canker, and also I would urge people to really devote considerable attention to the uplands in their management of dieback. That's it.
Fantastic, Stephen. Thank you. And look, sorry, an apology too. I gave a terrible introduction then. So for those that aren't aware, that's Stephen Hopper. Professor Stephen Hopper is based at the University of Western Australia down in the Albany campus. Many of you may know Stephen previously as the Director of Kings Park Botanic Gardens Authority based up in Perth. And I know even I was under Kings Park under Kingsley Dixon in the early 2000s and quite involved in dieback research and also management at Bold Park and Kings Park at the time as well. So thanks very much, Stephen. Does we have any questions from the floor?
Hey Steve, how are you going?
Pretty good.
Yeah. So my question is, how do you think dieback has modified mating systems in ground-up ecosystems and uplands more generally? And are any changes in mating systems additional threat to the long-term persistence of these ecosystems?
That's a really good question. The mating systems of banksia, for example, have been documented, and I think verticillata as well. The usual story is they're preferentially outcrossing. I guess I'm not aware of a specific study that has looked at dieback infected and non-dieback infected granite banksia. So, short answer to your question is don't know, but based on what we do know about banksia and their mating systems, the pegging out of populations would be a considerable concern. One thing that we have learned and are learning now, particularly some good stuff on Eucalyptus caesia, is that, and one of the predictions about these upland landscapes is that they've persisted for millions of years, populations on them, in relatively small number. And there's been, the prediction is that there's been intense natural selection to get through the inbreeding depression decline that normally applies to small populations. There's genetic mechanisms that can achieve this. And if you can purge the lethal genes that are associated with inbreeding, then you have the potential to persist for very long periods of time in small populations. So that gives me a little bit of comfort that provided not everything goes extinct on these outcrops, you might expect prolonged persistence of populations compared to stuff that's affected by dieback that is in the lowlands and occurs in much bigger populations. Did I get, you had a 2-point to your question. Did I answer both?
Sorry, what was that, Steve?
Did you have a second prong to your question?
The second prong is about these changes in mating systems being additional threats with long-term persistence in the ecosystems. And I think
could you repeat that?
Sorry, I said I think you've already covered it.
Okay.
So it was any changes in the ecosystems.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Some online questions. We might have to just keep it to one. David,
Yeah, so David online asked, what are the banksia canker pathogens?
What are the pathogens? I knew someone would ask me that. I can't recall the generic and specific name, but they were published from memory by Brian Shearer and his colleagues in DBCA about 10 years ago. I don't know whether anyone in the audience can help with this. I've got Botryosphaeria. That sounds familiar, yes, as one of the genera.
right, excellent. And was there another question, quick one online, or we? Fantastic.
All good.
Thank you. All right, fantastic. Thanks again, Steve. Much appreciated.
Yep.